All right, so chapter 13, we're up to presentation and analysis of our current liabilities. Okay, so the first thing about current liabilities, we have to be careful about what gets reported as current liabilities because there's a lot of incentive for companies to report everything as long-term as they can, just so they look less risky. So that's why FASB has all the rules. Okay, so current liabilities, they're due within 1 year or the operating cycle, whichever is longer. We don't really get into the operating cycle problems here, but basically due within 1 year. And they have to use current assets or create another current liability to be classified as a current liability. So what does that mean in plain English? It's not a current liability if you're going to use long-term assets to pay it off. So say you had a long-term fund and you were going to pay something that's coming due soon, that would not be a current liability because it's not using current assets to pay it off. You can call something a current liability if you're replacing this current liability with another current liability. You could not call it a current liability if you're replacing our current liability with a bonds payable or some other long-term notes payable. Okay, so due within 1 year or the operating cycle, whichever is longer, and it's got to use current assets or create another current liability in order to classify it as current. Let's see. And I think I mentioned a couple of other things in the notes about they're reported at their full maturity value, so what you owe is what gets reported. Interest is usually not a factor in our current liabilities because they're due soon. And for U.S. financial statements, current liabilities are reported first on the balance sheet, then long-term. If you look at international statements, they're pretty much just the opposite. Okay. Companies will vary as to how they list the current liabilities on exams. As long as they're current liabilities and you get them in there somehow, that's okay. But some companies list them in order of the amount due, some in terms of their maturity value, or they list them in different ways. Largest amounts to smallest, or liquidation preference. I'm just happy if they're listed in the current liabilities section. Okay, so contingencies, these have to be disclosed in the notes to the financial statements. We do bring some of them on if they are probable and reasonably estimable. These are included as a contingent liability on our financial statements. These are the only ones that get recorded. Okay. So probable and reasonably estimable. These would be our, warranty expense, some of the premiums and all of that. Now, if they're either probable or estimable, but not both, those would just get disclosed in the notes to the financial statements. Okay? So, and then if they're remote, they're usually, you don't have to disclose them unless they are guarantees of indebtedness to others, standby letters of credit, and repurchase agreements. Repurchase agreements must be disclosed. And there are very good reasons for that. You have companies in the past who have not disclosed repurchase agreements and have ended up in serious financial difficulty because of them. Okay? All right, so remote, you're usually not going to have to disclose them except for these kinds of items. All right, so then as far as our analysis, we've got the of our current liabilities. The most popular, you've got the current ratio, your current assets divided by current liabilities, and your acid test ratio. Okay, so these current assets divided by current liabilities, if you've got 200 in current assets and 100 in current liabilities, you'd say, oh, okay, we're doing pretty well. We've got more than enough current assets to pay off our current liabilities. That would be better than if you had, say 100 over 200, then you would have 100 in current assets to cover 200 in current liabilities, and that would not be so good, right? We'd be a little bit sadder about that. So generally, you'd kind of hope for this number to be greater than 1, because that would make the company, you know, a little less risky. Okay, but there's a caveat with that, and that is you could have two different companies with the same current ratio, but one of them might be a little bit better off than the other. So say you had company A that had 120 in cash, and let's say okay, and then they had 50 in accounts receivable and 30 in inventory. That would give them the 200 current assets, right? Okay, then you could have another company that had $30 in cash, $50 in accounts receivable, and the rest, 120 in inventory. And they too would have a 200 as current assets. But which company is better able to pay their bills? Okay, this company only has $30 in cash, and you know they've got their to cover the 100 in current liabilities. This one has 120 in cash, and you know the receivables are about the same. But you'd wonder, why is the inventory building up? Are they not selling it? Are they in trouble? You know, what's going on here? So just to look at the current ratio is not enough. You have to look and see the composition of the current ratio, especially your current assets. Okay, the acid test ratio is to try to get more at what the company could actually pay if they had to pay their bills, you know, very soon. It's also called the quick ratio, so quick or acid test ratio. And this is just cash plus your short-term investments plus your accounts receivable, which they presume are more liquid than inventory. So these are kind of your liquid assets, and so but the same caveat applies. You want to see, you know, how much is cash? Are these short-term investments really negotiable? You know, are they marketable? And are the receivables getting collected? So it's not foolproof, but it gives you a little better indication of the ability of the company to pay its current obligations. Okay, so that kind of wraps up chapter 13 on presentation and analysis.